Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hello, this is Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles. Thanks for listening. Chiara Rose Shannon is a California-based advanced sommelier, certified yoga instructor, and mindfulness practitioner. And she's also known as the Yogi Sommelier. Her unique approach to mindful wine tasting and combining the principles and practices of yoga with wine have been featured in the Wall Street Journal. Chiara believes in wine as a part of a healthy, balanced, and meaningful lifestyle. Her wellness-informed approach to wine education integrates principles of yoga, mindfulness, and traditional sommelier training on top of a deep working knowledge informed by many years in the industry. An advocate for environmental sustainability, Chiara has niche expertise in organic, biodynamic, and natural wines, and sourcing sustainable alternatives within the three-tier system. What is the connection between yoga and wine, you may ask? Well, the word connection is actually the key to answering that question. As we talk, I think you'll find that the way Chiara approaches this question provides a perspective that is much broader and deeper than either yoga or wine. Enjoy. Hi, Chiara. Thanks for joining.
Hey, Adam. Pleasure to be here as always.
It is a pleasure, and I just want to jump in and say, let's talk about the uniqueness that is you. You have a brand, but it's also part of who you are, the Yogi Sommelier. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you do in your life right now? How did you arrive at this place, and talk a little bit about what the Yogi Sommelier is?
Yes, it's funny that you start with that because one of my favorite jokes about this is to say that if you could ever imagine two more ridiculous enterprises that are expensive and time-consuming and don't guarantee anything, it's
Don't
pursuing
guarantee income or
don't guarantee anything. It's pursuing, sommelier training and certifications and all that jazz. And same goes for yoga teacher training. Like two probably the most esoteric sort of occupations you could think of. But at the same time, I also like to say that, like wine, yoga, or you could say yoga and wine, have been altering states of consciousness in humans since the beginning of time, or at least since the beginning of when we can remember. So there's a lot there. So on the one hand, it can be, difficult to understand the relationship between the two or how someone could have both in their life. But on the other hand, there is a lot of similarity, and I can talk about that. And I'll start with sort of explaining that yoga came into my life first. I started practicing yoga shortly, around the time of finishing college, so early 20s. And I wasn't, it was just at the time considered, I was just doing it to be, it just seemed like it was exercise, it was relaxing, and I really liked the ritual of it, just having a place to go, the same thing over and over again. This was in the early 2000s when Bikram yoga was huge, and so that's a lot of people's gateway to yoga, at least who are my age.
And that's the hot one, right?
That's the hot one, yeah. And that's sort of fallen from glory, but that's another. There's a lot of information about that people can look up.
Right.
But I really, I found that there was benefits to one thing that I will say about that practice of yoga is that it really a huge component of it is the breath. And so that is something that is foundational to all practices of yoga, and that is essentially foundational now that we're learning more about meditation, mindfulness, and just overall wellness. Breath and breath work is very important. And
doesn't the word yoga come from the word breath?
Well, the word yoga,
or something
I've
like
heard.
that.
Well, actually, it comes from. There's different interpretations of this, but the explanation that I was taught is that it means union, or actually it's derived from the Sanskrit meaning yolk, like yolking oxen or something. and it
Interesting.
means union. And essentially, it is the union of the breath in the body, the union of the
The
divine
mind
and
and
the
the
people. Yeah,
body.
yeah. So it's kind of union on different planes of union.
Ah,
Because
that's
there's
interesting.
in yoga, it's not just about the physical. There's many different um, energetic levels that are taken it part of the practice. So anyway, yeah, but breath is a big part of it, and in fact, in the original practices of yoga, when you read how it was developed in the ancient texts, initially, the whole discipline of yoga was all centered around being able to meditate and meditation, and the idea of doing all of these series of poses, which are called asanas, was not something that was part of the original um,
Mm,
recipe. And in
right.
fact, it was only yoga is only mentioned once in the original texts, the Yoga Sutras, and it was essentially a way to prepare you for meditation or like take a seat for meditation. So this
Mm.
concept of all of these, and then over thousands of years, it has evolved to include many more asanas, let's just say, than just sitting. Because actually, I mean, I don't want to. This is a long thing, but like it.
No.
I think that the yogis figured out that just sitting is actually really hard to do, and so if you want to sit for meditation to attain bliss or samadhi for many hours, you actually have to be physically strong, and so have a strong core and be able to like
Mm.
withstand the challenges of sitting. And so that's what I learned, was kind of the explanation for how these different postures evolved to strengthen the body to prepare you for meditation. And so circling back to what I think, that original practice of yoga, my introduction to yoga with that particular practice did instill in me a respect for and appreciation for controlled breathing in yoga, and that's something that I still practice and value. And I think now we have, as technology evolves, we're learning more and more about how beneficial and important that is for health across the spectrum. So that so yoga came into my life first, and then I went to school in the Bay Area, and I was, of course, a humanities major with another thing that doesn't guarantee any job.
I'm right
But I
there
love,
with you.
but I love to travel, and I grew up around wine, and I love culture and people and all these different things, and so being in the Bay Area and being near the Napa Valley and Sonoma, it became sort of a natural result that I ended up moving to wine country and working. My first job was in the office at Schramsberg Vineyards in Calistoga,
Mm.
doing admin, answering phones, doing just anything that was needed, and assisting the marketing people there. And so that was my first job in the wine business. And I moved to Napa, and I really became enamored of wine country living and witnessing the cycles of the vineyards throughout each season, and just diving headfirst into the whole industry. Um, so I did learn, however, that I was more interested at the time in learning about wine. I wanted to learn about wine from all over the world. I wanted to learn about all the different varietals, and I wanted to educate and pursue more of what at the time I saw to be a sommelier type route, as opposed to working in production or working in viticulture, which are a lot of the jobs at the time. Remember, this is still like 15 years ago. So um,
Hmm.
I didn't want to be a winemaker. I didn't want to, work in the production side. And so I decided to pursue my sommelier studies and go that route. And I
Hmm.
never wanted to work in a restaurant because I like to go to restaurants. It never was attractive to me to work in one. Um, but I thought I didn't really have you know, my long-term plan was to just become a wine professional and take these tests and go that route. And so I saw as a stepping stone along that path was the retail side of the business. And so it's funny, I'm currently the wine buyer at Mission Wines in South Pasadena. But during this sort of, let's say, this would have been back in like 2006. So this big transitional time, my first part-time retail job, I moved back to LA. I'm originally from LA. I left Napa. I moved back to LA and I worked at Mission Wines part-time under Chris to get my feet wet in retail. And if anyone who knows Mission Wines and knows of Chris Miski, he was the OG sommelier in LA, the head sommelier of Patina Restaurant in the 90s. And, under Joachim Splichal and, a big deal in the sommelier world. And he, so I knew that there was, there was a path. And if anything, working under him would teach me some more about whether I even wanted to do this or anything. And so I worked part-time at Mission Wines, and that was my gateway into retail. I ended up moving back to the Bay Area after a year and getting a job with K&L Wine Merchants. And I was with K&L Wine Merchants for about 7 years. And lo and behold, during that time, they launched a new program called the Personal Sommelier Service. And so I actually got to be a sommelier working in retail because I was the first head sommelier for that program. I launched the program. I oversaw its takeoff and was able to grow it and shepherd it along during my tenure there. And I'm very proud of that. And sorry?
Are they still doing that?
They still have it. Yeah, they still have it. It's a customized wine club program where you can sign up and get X amount of wines according to your budget with these various parameters and have either the head sommelier or your favorite staff person choose the wines for you. So it's kind of a cool program. And I was, so let's see. So during that time when I was with K&L, that was when I began studying, taking the WSET exams and studying and taking, getting the legit certification for the legit sommelier certifications. Because when you work for a place like K&L, you taste rigorously. Like they're very, very good about wanting all of their staff to be very knowledgeable about the wines. And so we would have weekly staff tastings. I kept all of my notes, and it's like boxes and boxes. I mean, we're talking hundreds of wines a week, possibly. And with K&L, it's Bordeaux, Burgundy. This is not just like, your run-of-the-mill retail wines. I mean, old back vintages of old California wines. And you're tasting with people who have been in the business since the 60s, 70s, since the 70s. So including the founders, Clyde Beffa, tasting Bordeaux with Clyde Beffa. I mean, it was such a remarkable experience, and probably a priceless experience, really, because normally if you ask a lot of people who work in retail, like that's not the typical experience. Like if you're working at Bevlo or something, like you don't get that, So, and if you're working at a small brick and mortar shop, you're not going to get that either because the breadth of the inventory isn't the same.
Right.
So, so that was a really excellent time for me to develop my palate and to learn, and particularly for these studying for these exams. So I learned, though, and I've been practicing yoga all this time in my spare time, sometimes more consistently than others, but it's always been something that I've done. And I discovered that while I was studying for the WSET exams, that I discovered that I was, able to, my ability to focus and tune out distractions was really good. Like I was really good in blind tasting. I thought, I was just kind of noticing that, I wonder if this is related to practicing yoga, because when you're practicing yoga, you're practicing, not paying attention to what's going on next to you, tuning into the moment, being with your
Mm.
breath, all these different things that are kind of required for being successful in wine tasting. Because really,
Right.
with wine tasting, the biggest challenge is to just not be distracted by the person next to you and to not be distracted by your own thoughts. It's
Right.
really just to be able to identify what's going on right in front of you. What colors are you seeing? What are you smelling? What are you tasting? And also at the same time, what are you not seeing? What are you not smelling? What are you not tasting? Like I think that, you know, our monkey mind is so much at play when we're wine tasting that that's the biggest challenge, is to understand what's the truth and what's not the truth. And that takes practice. Like it's so easy to get sidetracked. You hear all the time about people talking about, oh, I totally thought it was this, but then at the last moment I changed my mind. It's always something easy. Like I so knew it was a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, but then at the last moment I just like changed my mind and I put like, you know, Sancerre or something else, and it's
Right.
always something like that. It's like your first instinct is usually correct, and then you get your mind plays tricks on you, and then you go down a rabbit hole and all that stuff.
Right.
So I
You
actually think that,
justify that. Yeah.
yeah. So I kind of started to think, this is interesting, and then I noticed that um, was I started to apply those techniques while tasting at work. So at K&L tasting it, and periodically there would be these blind tasting challenges,
Oh.
and someone would put like a mystery wine in the room and in a decanter, and throughout the day everyone would go down and like give it their shot and submit their guesses or whatever, and whoever
Uh-huh.
whoever won got to get a prize. And I remember that I actually don't even I can't I actually don't even now I don't even remember what the wine was, but I won it. Like I remember, going in and taking my notes and focusing and everything. And I think the ants, gosh, I'm trying to remember what it was. I think so it ended up being like a Bordeaux, like a Bordeaux style, like a Bordeaux style blend from Chile, like a 2005, like something like this. And my guess was, old, New World Bordeaux blend, 5 years old or whatever, and it was something like that, hit it on the nail. So
Nice.
I won the thing, and I was that sort of that's and I know it was kind of cool because everyone in the store gave me high fives, and I got one of those cool blind tasting those blue Riedel glasses, like.
Oh, nice. A lot of positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
I love it.
But anyways, it kind of set it in for me. I was like, this really isn't about, and I say this in the wine classes that I teach, anybody can do this. It's not about being better at tasting than anybody else. This is a matter of practice and discipline.
Right.
And so if you are willing to like actually focus and pay attention, take notes, cross-examine your old notes, eliminate things that don't add up, and really, really just pay attention, you're going to get, this is not rocket science. This is focus and discipline. And so that has been with me ever since. And I find that anytime I'm trying to taste and I'm feeling distracted and I'm feeling scattered, I just, take a breath and tune out the stuff that isn't doesn't make sense, or it's just noise in my head, and just really zero in on the moment. And it's never failed me. So I, and yeah, so I guess now how does it lead me to being the Yogi Sommelier? Well, I have learned, I mean, I guess you could say I've developed a perspective on wine tasting and wine that comes from this experience. So I believe, like I just said, that anybody can taste wine. They just need, it's just a matter of practicing mindfulness when you're doing it. And it's interesting, though simultaneously I have gone and pursued, I've pursued my sommelier certifications sort of, first, and then in the next chapter, I began pursuing my certifications going deeper in yoga. So I'm at the 500-hour level certification. which is like generally speaking the highest level of certificate. I mean, I'm not a master teacher or anything, but in terms of what you can certify, that's the highest you can get, and then beyond that, it's just hours of teaching and other things that you do. But I have learned through this path in my life so much more about different practices of yoga and different techniques and tools and mindfulness, that it all is kind of circling back to inform my perspective as a wine professional. So everything has gradually become very, very intertwined. You could even say integrated or unified. um,
Yokes.
to the point where now I teach people mindful wine tasting, and it's just my approach. I think it's, rather than teaching people to look for specific things or that this tastes like this and this tastes like that, I rather teach people to understand their own tasting experience and to be able to breathe, focus, and pay attention, and to feel empowered in their own experience, so that they can then go on and taste wine and evaluate it authentically, rather than just recycling or repeating what other people tell them. I think that having a foundation to be able to do that prepares you to be able to, if you want to be a sommelier, that's an excellent preparation. If you want to be just someone who feels like you're getting more from your experience with wine, or that you can deepen your appreciation, it helps you with that. So that's kind of where I'm at now with the wine professional side of it, in terms of my perspective on wine tasting. I also kind of peeling the layers back along this path as we travel deeper and deeper and deeper. One thing that if you're practicing yoga, you eventually get to a point where you realize that it's not just about the physical postures, and that there's deeper meaning. And so, it's being a good person and giving back to society. I mean, there's all these different, let's just say, limbs of yoga that open up. And I have had the same experience with wine. I have found that my path now, it's not just about, oh, this wine tastes good or this wine is rare and exciting. For me, I'm now really interested in, and I'm just really passionate about, like, soil and and sustainability and the people behind the wine, and the stories of wine, and kind of in a funny way, like circling back to the sort of spiritual, or like the part of wine that we can't really find the exact words to describe, and so it's kind of come full circle in a way, because it's more about that to me now. So the types of events that I create around wine, or the types of content that I create around wine, is so much more focused on the people, the place, um, the story behind the wine, all of the pieces that go into it, down to the microbiological level. That and so you could also say the same thing about my yoga practice. So it's funny. It's like they are totally related in my world, and I like sharing that with others. So yeah, that's how I've become the Yogi Sommelier. And it's funny because a lot of people think, oh, yoga and wine, either they don't see them as going together, or they've now, when I started doing yoga and wine, or wellness related wine events, gosh, almost 10 years ago, it was not very common. But now it's like every yoga studio, or every, like, they're everywhere. And some people have judgments about that, but whatever. So yeah, so that I don't teach yoga. I practice yoga. I teach mindful wine tasting, which is a technique of tasting and appreciating wine that comes from this, so I guess you could say, yogic or mindfulness perspective. And I celebrate, the story of wine, the history of wine, and very engaged in the environmental side of it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna jump in. I have so many questions based on everything you've said, if that's okay.
Go
I
for it.
I was, just listening to you, and you were talking about even your first job in wine at Schramsberg and how you were witnessing the cycles of the season in the vineyard, and I couldn't help but think about how, I think there are breathing cycles and cycles of movement in yoga, and there's this connection between nature and the rhythm of our lives. And I'm I know that connection is, because we've sort of talked about it, that it's an important aspect of what you're promoting with mindful wine tasting. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about what connection means, why it's an important part of that, and how is it meaningful to you?
Yeah, well, it's funny. This morning, as I was practicing yoga, I think about this a lot. I practice a style of yoga called Ashtanga yoga, and it's a formatted style. It's a sequence, a led sequence by a teacher. I practice with an amazing teacher named Jody Bloomstein, who's you know a master teacher, and it's rooted in a lineage. And so, you know, when you're practicing, you're part not just of the community of other practitioners that are doing it with you, but you're connected to the teacher, and you're connected to my teacher's teacher, and all of the teachers going back. And it's 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 all about connection, I guess. Connecting the breath and the body, connecting to the community, connecting to the lineage, and also, there's recognize, one, I actually think it's very liberating to feel like you're not alone, and also to feel like there's something bigger than you, and that what you're doing
Mm.
is for you, but also it's for something bigger. And it doesn't matter if you can't describe what that is or give it words. I think there's something very liberating and at the same time empowering of sort of surrendering to that which we don't know, to the bigger picture, to the bigger story. And that's something that I feel when I practice. It's also something that I feel when I am, walking the vineyards with the winemaker, and hearing about things such as, vines that have networks of roots going back, going down 50 meters, and that they've, the 100-year-old plus vines, that, outdate. You'll have like one vineyard that's older than whoever's farming it. um, and also the lineage, the tradition of wine, and the lineage of viticulture. It's it's always tied. There's always some spiritual connection in some way, whether it's, the family has been farming this land forever and ever and ever. I mean, and I don't have to say, like, wine is in the Bible, and it goes back and back and back. But go
Right.
go hang out with any biodynamic farmer, for example, and it's a lot of spiritual talk, because they're not doing it for the money. They're doing it for the meaning, because of, greater purpose. It's a lifestyle. It
Mhm.
is a connection to the earth and to the sun and to the cosmos, that they're part, that they want to nurture and cultivate and be a part of. And um and so i I feel it everywhere. It's all energy work. Yoga is energy work. Viticulture and winemaking is energy work.
Mm.
um Wine is the energy of the sun captured by the grapes, by the vines, with the water drawn up from the soil, and the energy of the all the microbes, and it's transformed into something that we can drink, and its energy comes into our bodies and transforms our energy. And so it's like, yeah, I could, that's just getting a little woo woo, but, like, it's all energy, and we're all connected. And one thing that I thought was really, um, a really clear way to state it. I was on a wine trip with an importer 2 years ago in France, and we visited a property in Cahors in southwest France,
Mm.
where, they farm biodynamically. And, um, the woman winemaker is very much like a soil geek and, soil scientist, and had, goes to conferences in Geneva and different things, and was saying that, you know, we've always, farming this way has worked, and people have done it because of the proof was in the pudding type of thing, and without really knowing why. But now
Mm.
we have the technology to observe at the microbiological level what's going on, and learning the why behind the woo. So now we're learning the why behind the woo on the farming level. When it comes to soil, we're learning the why behind the woo on the microbiological level with our own bodies, with gut health and the gut biome, and how, the ancient Ayurvedic, the ancient healers, thinking about the connection between the gut and the brain actually were right after all. And
Mhm.
also the why behind the woo with meditation, observing the shift, how our brain waves shift when we're in meditation, and different things like that. So now we have the technology to observe the why behind the woo, and seeing that everything is connected after all. And then I'll make one other comment about that is, people talk about yoga as a practicing yoga, what practice yoga. And so, like, what are we practicing for? In the yoga world, the answer that I hear and kind of what I think is that you're practicing yoga to be able to deal with life. So life is crazy. We're thrown curveballs all the time. There's no guarantees. And how you address how you address the challenges that come up on your mat helps you develop the fortitude and the mental strength and all these different things, and process the trauma and process the emotional stuff that, through your body, that can help you deal with life better. So it really is a practice. Like, the purpose of yoga is not to be able to do handstand or to be able to, like, do a perfect, jump through. I mean, these are all actions, but that's not the goal. The goal is to be able to uh, deal with life in a harmonious and hopefully joyful and healthy way. And so
Do you
that's
agree with
another.
that?
I totally agree with that. And in fact,
Okay.
it has never been more true for me since the pandemic happened, because everything
Mm.
changed, and I was, you know, able to, had the time um, and the space to actually be able to practice yoga more in a more disciplined manner at home, um,
Yeah.
and develop, really strengthen this practice. And it has been a lifesaver in terms of being able to cope with all of the challenges that we've faced emotionally, like energetically, having
Yeah.
that there to do, having that time to be focused and um, on my mat, and sort of tune out the distractions of the world and just cultivate peace. And it's not always easy, sometimes I barely even get there, and it's just sort of like I'm going through the motions. But I have found, even when you do that, I feel better and can handle, like, whatever happens after that.
Right.
And I kind of think, I don't farm. I have a little garden in the back, but when I talk to people who for whom farming is their life, especially biodynamic farming, it seems like it's a similar thing. Like, vineyard work is not easy, but there's something rhythmic and something very powerful and healing about going out there every day, touching the vines, pruning, whatever it is, the cycles of the work are.
Mm.
It's very powerful and healing work. And
Yeah.
I think that there's something similar to these two practices. I think we're all sort of on the same path,
Yeah.
and practicing in different ways. And not everyone can do that. And I think, yoga is one discipline for people to kind of to bring a little bit of that into their life. But there are many other ways people can achieve that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as somebody who gardens and, you know, farms or does practices viticulture on a very small scale in an urban setting, it is, I, for me, it over time has begun to break down this illusion that I am this human who is gardening my lawn, and I realize that, I'm really inseparable from it. Like, have whole meals that come from this land that is grown, in this little patch of dirt in South Central. And I'm realizing that those foods make me who I am. I mean, I'm living because of them, and that there's a direct connection, and the microbes that are in the environment around me are being consumed by me and being part of me and helping me become who I am mentally and in other ways. And you almost begin to be more sensitive to everything that's going on. A lot of the time the work is just observing. A lot of time you're going out and seeing what's happening so that you can learn from
Yeah,
how nature is.
I love that you just said that, because if you could sum up, at least in the Ashtanga system of yoga, if you could sum up like the purpose and the methodology of the practice, it would be focus, practice,
Uh-huh.
so that you can achieve oneness. Like
That's
the
interesting. Yeah.
illusion is that we are separate. Like that's the
Right.
problem. And
This is, yeah.
yoga is part of the recipe for us to undo that illusion so that we can become one. And this is as it's laid out in the ancient texts. So you just like said that as that's awesome. I love that. But I think in kind of taking that comparison, whether it's on your yoga mat or working in the garden or whatever we do, horseback riding, whatever it is that we do, um, that is the goal, I think, because we aren't separate. And to think that
Yeah.
we're separate is the foundation of disease and problems. Thinking that we're separate from animals gives us reason to mistreat when you think about all these
Yeah.
different things. Once we start to go down this path of realizing that we are not separate from other humans, that we are not separate from animals, that we are not separate in all of these different ways. I think it's scary for people because it becomes very hard to, there's a security that comes with being able to put a little box around your life, and
Control.
and to
Yeah.
control, and to be able to say you can come in and you can't come in, and
Right.
I'm this and you're that. I mean, I think there's like senses
Mm.
of security that come with that for people, but it's not real. And the
Yeah.
real thing is that we're all connected. And when we, going back into the yoga stuff, even in the classical system, even before you do postures, you're already supposed to have done the personal work of like taking care of others and taking care of yourself. Like step one and
Mm.
step two, there's eight, the eight lymph paths. So you're already supposed to have and then you can do, then it's postures, and it's, breathing, and then it's sense control and all these different things. And so, yeah, that's totally been my path too. Even we rescued 3 dogs 6 years ago, a litter of three. We rescued 3 puppies, and
Mm.
I loved animals before, but since having these dogs and since caring for them and all the ups and downs that have come with it, I've become so much more committed to like animal rights
Mm.
causes and concerned for animal welfare. Um, just as with the more that I've learned about farming, whether it's farming in my own yard or other urban farmers around here, and viticulture, um, the more I've learned about the importance of caring for the soil and caring for the pollinators and all these different things. Like I'm more committed to these causes too, and to advocating um, for environmental wellness. And you know and that's
Yeah.
a whole other rabbit hole. I mean, um,
No, I mean I think we're already in that rabbit
yeah,
hole.
you can't. The other thing I say too is at least once you learn these things, you don't unlearn them.
Yes.
Once
Yeah.
once you once this openness has been created, or this connection has been created, you're sort of pushed into the next level. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah, absolutely.
it's been my experience, especially when I talk to people about wine. People who care about organic wine come to me in the wine shop wanting to try organic wine, or wanting to learn, or they don't even know, but they care about these things. Like, oh, I eat organic food, I buy wine, shop at the farmers market, blah blah blah, but they've never considered about wine in the context of organic. And when
Yeah.
I introduced that concept to them, they're like, whoa, I thought, they, whatever they thought, it never occurred to them to like think of organic as a criteria for making a wine choice. And in my experience with this, it's like an aha moment where you could like see the light go off and they realize like, oh, like I'm permanently changed. Like I'm not going to unlearn this. Like this, I may keep buying the same thing, but I'm going to think twice, and maybe eventually over time, my buying habits are going to change because of this awareness.
Yeah. That's yep, absolutely. So that's that. I mean, this ties into a question I wanted to ask you, which is sort of like, what is mindful wine tasting? What does that mean, and how do you guide people through that? I mean, obviously you don't have to teach your class right now, but what are some of the things that you do? Because you brought up this sort of aha moment that people have, and I'm wondering if are those two connected, or is mindful wine tasting something that's limited to just the specific sensory experience of a wine, or is it broader than that? And yeah, I'll stop
Yeah,
asking
it's
questions. I'll let you answer.
yeah. So I I infuse mindful wine principles in a lot of different things that I, whether it's content that I create, or with the way that I talk, but it's specifically in the mindful wine class. Let's just kind of focus on that. Yeah, I incorporate some principles of mindfulness in the class. I have found in my experience that, you know you there are tools and techniques for becoming centered, so that you can be more present in the moment, and the best gateway for that is the breath. So typically in a mindful wine class, I will start with a breathing exercise, and depending on a few factors, sort of how things are feeling that day, that may be the topic of the class, if there's a specific topic, or if there's if there's something, if it's a full moon, I don't know, like if there's something like cosmically that seems to be like dominating the energy, I might choose one breathing exercise or the other. But there's, I'll start with an easy breathing exercise, and I found that every time I do this, it's like it's immediately centering for me, and then it feels like after I'm done, everyone just like kind of sighs, and you can like everyone relaxes, and it's like, oh, I've arrived, and so that's always how it starts. And
Hmm.
and then I take people through the steps of wine tasting, which are the basic steps of wine tasting that you learn in wine 101, appearance,
Sure.
aroma, taste, and conclusions. But rather than give people definitions of what they should be looking for, um, in terms of like, you know this is yellow, this is gold, I rather instead just invite them to observe and notice what they notice, and allow people to have different experiences and hold space for that. So because taste is subjective, and we all see things different ways and experience things different ways, and so I think that and as you know, I've been in retail for like 15 years, so I talked to a lot of people about wine. I've sold, I mean, thousands and thousands of hours of these types of conversations, but a lot of people are intimidated about wine. They think they aren't good enough. They think, you know, they've had an experience where they were wine tasting and someone said something and they didn't share that experience, and so they felt like they were stupid or didn't know, um, or they have been talked down to by someone, and so um, in this class, that's I'm reversing that. So people experience what they experience. It's all valid. If you see green, if you see yellow, if you see whatever, that's what you see. You can take notes. And I provide suggestions for language, but I also encourage people to come up with their own language. So, for example, that can be really hard if you're. This is also another challenge. People say they don't have the words to describe, and that's not a question of being a good taster or not. That's just a question of language. And
Right.
so, sometimes a good play. I include memories, so people have memories. I encourage that count. That's part of the experience, and we can use our memories to draw out the language. And so, yeah, I take people through the steps, and it's much more. deconstructed like that, and it's open and inviting. And usually at first everyone's really nervous and they don't really want to share, but I'll typically do 3 wines and talk about the different steps, and also like a little bit of what's going on behind the scenes. What's really happening when we're looking at a wine, because we make snap judgments all the time and they can influence us. So if you have had a previously bad experience with rosé, like that might be clouding your experience in the moment if it's a rosé, And so we're trying
Yeah.
to tease that out so that we can not have the judgments be there. Like they can be there, but we sort of put a pin in them and put them to the side and then continue on with just observing. And the same thing with
Right.
smelling. People oftentimes might smell aromas can be very triggering and can bring up all these things and also whatever. And so um, tools for, like I said, we're practicing. So in this class, we're going to practice whatever that is. We're going to practice like identifying it, being a witness. If it's helpful, put it in one box. If it's not helpful, but it's there, we're going to put it to the side and keep trying to understand what we're experiencing. So this is the work of mindfulness. Um,
Mm.
and so our mind, people have this notion that when you're meditating or whatever, that like the mind goes blank. That's not what happens. The mind is always active. It's the work of being able to still be present and continuing on with 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 the moment, with the meditation, while all this stuff is going on. And so yeah, and so I think it's really fascinating. A lot of people don't know that there's, that everyone has different way. We have, the wine is the wine, but the way that we smell it and what it triggers in our brains and the memories that it brings up in each person is going to be unique. Um, and then there's the language thing, like through having conversations, rather than just me saying, "Oh, this is what I smell and this is this." I'll make suggestions to people or say, "Well, if you're if first, if you're remember, if oh, okay, so you're having a memory of being at summer camp. Where was summer camp? Was it in a forest? Was it in, wherever?" And then we can tease out, well, maybe it's like the cedar that you're smelling, or maybe it's the pine tree, or maybe it's
Mm.
the campfire, like, and so just kind of, and then if that, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, it kind of is like that." And then it's like, then I might say, well, a couple different words that can be used to describe and blah, 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 like smoky, whatever, or not, it just kind of depends on what people are responding to. And
Hmm.
then, so then taste, going through being able to differentiate between what we smell and what we taste. Smell is with the nose, and also it happens entirely in the imagination. Taste
Right.
taste is the facts. Like taste is what our tongue is registering through its, you know, through the taste buds. Um, and so these are facts. Temperature, texture, is it bubbly, not, bitterness, sour, all that stuff. Like those are facts of the wine. And then being able to kind of assemble everything together. And you know I don't, I encourage people to have whatever conclusion that they have, even if they don't like the wine, ask questions. Even if you don't like it, can you think of someone else that might like it? Even if you don't like it, is there a time in which you might think? So it's just like, rather than just being so like cut and dry, it's more of
Yeah.
a present moment experience that I think ultimately lays a foundation for people to engage more deeply without judgment, without fear of judgment, let's say fear of judgment, and actually start to build the connections, let's say, between language and the memory and the experience, to be able to have deepen their appreciation of wine, to gain the confidence to be able to talk about wine in a way that they feel is authentic to them, to be able to learn some vocabulary that accurately reflects what they are experiencing, all these different things. And so ultimately I think it's an empowerment exercise. It's fun. People inevitably, going back to what you're saying of how does it expand into a bigger, we start with this very small action of wine tasting, but inevitably it always expands to a bigger conversation about life and about experience, about memory. People usually have questions about the wines themselves, and I try to incorporate or focus exclusively on organic, biodynamic, and natural wines in these classes, and then inevitably it leads to talk. What does that mean? And so it always branches out farther and farther and farther. Every class is different. It just depends on the group and what they're responding to, what they're curious about. And I always find that people, especially when it's like just deciphering between smell and taste, people will have an aha moment where they realize like what sweetness means, or dry, because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't, they'll have an experience and they'll say, I can, I can describe, I see this in my mind, but I can't describe it. And I think a lot of it has to come with a conflation of like what you're smelling and what you're tasting, um, becoming conflated into something that could be easily picked apart if you could just say like, well, is it sweet? Like, are you tasting sugar or not? Is it just the smell that's making you think that? Because like floral aromas and different things can make people think something sweet when it's actually not. And so people realize, oh, they have like these moments where they realize that they figured it out for themselves, um, and and a lot of people really appreciate finally learning what the word dry even means. Because a lot of people
That's
use it
wild.
without knowing what it means and are too afraid to ask. And any other word, I'll get, this is a common thing in these classes, is people will want to say, I've never asked this before. I've always felt stupid, but, and then they like ask the question. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, the thing about dry, it's funny because some people mean, I think a lot of people who are learning, it's tannins is what they refer to as
It's
dry.
the sensation of dryness,
Yeah,
not the
right.
word.
That
Yeah.
that astringency or
Hmm.
something. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's
Yep.
interesting. To what extent do you think preference helps or hinders the tasting profit the process? I mean, I know that if I'm guessing because you've had this experience with beginning tasters where the first thing is I don't like this or I'd love this, and it's like how do you like that when people have that reaction, good or bad, or do you try to steer them beyond that and to a place beyond judgment where they can just start to try to understand, or is preference
Yeah.
help does
Yeah, I
preference
think
help you
I would
understand?
say I try to steer people away from, I mean, it's perfectly okay to not like it, but that's not the purpose of the exercise. So the purpose of the
Right.
exercise is to observe and to learn about your own experience. And I actually think wines that are challenging for people can be very educational,
Sure, yeah.
because that's probably a wine that you don't really spend much time thinking about, but has something to teach you. Perhaps this is your moment to learn what dry means, like, and
Right.
so, and it's okay, like, I think sometimes people feel intimidated, or like, again, like they don't want to do, it's intimidating, or they don't understand, um but it's actually can be really fun to play with a wine that you don't like, knowing that you don't have to like it. Rather, we're trying to understand what we're smelling, what we're tasting, and we're going to try to perhaps maybe even find the language to describe it, so that later down the road, maybe if you're at a restaurant, you actually know how to describe what you don't like. you know
Right.
so yeah, I think, people will like or not like the wines, but, and usually in my classes, even if someone doesn't like the wine, it's always something like, well, I have to admit this wasn't my favorite wine, but I actually found that, you know when I came back to it later, I noticed that it smelled different, or when I observed that. And so really it's the observation, the practice of being a witness, of observing, and sort of getting out of your head a little bit. That's the point. And so I think even with the wine that people don't like, they can still get that benefit, and it is empowering.
That's great. Yeah. It's very easy to talk to you, I've noticed. So I think we have a lot in common. But I want to I don't want to keep you too long. And I think a question I think is really important to me. I have many questions still that I'd love to ask, but I think just let's talk about what does health mean? What role does health play in your thinking about both yoga and wine? Like what connection what does
Ooh,
connection have to do with health?
connection. Yeah. Well, like all things, my definition of health has evolved over time. I think, when I was younger, there was a lot more of a focus on physical health, feeling like you're getting a good workout, um, as it relates to yoga. But now, and especially lately, health to me is so much more in like a mental health space. And what I mean by that is just a sense of balance, even when things are crazy. Um, Feeling like I have a balance between all the activities going on in my life. And that's, that's an important one, I think, especially when you work in the wine business. I mean, obviously we're dealing with alcohol, we're consuming alcohol. It's something that our bodies have to process, and we have to allow space for that, and have time for recovery, just like we have to allow space for recovery after we like run a marathon or whatever. Balance is very, very important, and I think balance is critical for health, however that works for you. For me, I love to have wine in the evening. I practice yoga in the morning. I don't like to have wine in the morning. I like to have coffee in the morning. I So you figure out the things that work. I like to garden. I like to spend time outside with dogs. So it's like all these different things to me add up to like a healthy day or healthy life. Reading, stimulating mental exercises, and so it's not so much about the workout part of it. Um, and and also, in the past, I've I don't really care so much about like what I eat in the way that I might have cared when I was in my 20s. um
Mm.
so now it's just more about balance. I eat the foods that I like. I don't eat the foods that don't make me feel good, and I don't count, the calories or anything like this. It's all
Yeah.
goes in, and then you do what you need to do to maintain balance. And as that's a big, balance is important in yoga. Obviously, that's a balance. It's a balancing exercise, not just physically but mentally. Balance is also huge and a big part of winemaking and viticulture. I mean, if there could you find a
Yeah.
term that is not used more? I mean, whether it's talking
Right.
about is the wine balance, whether it's talking about balance in the soil,
Mm.
balance in the vineyard, the vineyard itself, maintaining balance. I mean, I think that wasn't that Raj Par's whole conference, In Pursuit of Balance.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, so I kind of think In Pursuit of Balance really is the word, the phrase to kind of cover all these things. Yeah, it's a pursuit of balance is health. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I love that. Well, how could people find out more and maybe, sign up to do some mindful tasting with you, or learn more, whatever? How do you want people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm easy to reach through Instagram. My handle is the Yogi Sommelier.
Hey.
And so just direct message me that way. I also have a website, theyogisommelier.com. There's ways to contact me that way. And of course, you can email me, which I have. My email is Chiara at theyogisommelier.com. I think with the pandemic and everything, I've like probably, I mean, any of those ways are great, but I'm pretty active on Instagram. So if you message me there, that's a pretty good way to get a hold of me. And yeah, you can also
Great.
follow me there because I post information about events, and that could be another fun way to dabble, without doing a full on class, is coming to one of my events, and just meeting me and getting a sense of the types of wines that I like to showcase, and just the energy of the experience. So yeah, those are different ways to get them to participate.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to talk about where we just saw each other this weekend? As an example of some of the events that you do.
Sure, sure. So this past weekend on Saturday was the second in a series I have co-created, with the LA Vintners Association and Rose Hill Farm, which is an urban farm in LA, called Wine in the Garden. And it's a summer tasting series showcasing LA winemakers on LA terroir at this amazing garden urban farm called Rose Hill Farm, which is here in LA in Montecito Heights. And just bringing a little bit of that vineyard outdoor experience that we all love when we go to wine country, bringing a little bit of that into like the urban wine experience, and creating connection there. I've found that in LA, it's a huge city destination for food and wine, but a lot of our like food and wine experiences happen inside bars, restaurants, and since the pandemic, like at home, where not all of us have, gardens and beautiful outdoor spaces.
Right.
So, but even prior to the pandemic too, farm to table dinner at a restaurant. I mean, there haven't been events that have really brought together LA wine with LA urban like garden spaces and farm spaces like here in LA. So that's the concept of
Yeah.
it, and it's super fun. It's beautiful. From you see Catalina in one direction, Mount Baldy in the other, and it's interactive, so you can pick herbs and ask questions and just relax and have a good time. So the next one is going to be in the end of July, and I will be, if you on my Instagram, and I will be posting more about that. But that's certainly a fun event to check out. And Adam came on Saturday and had a good time, so you can vouch for it.
I did. I can totally vouch for it. I can also vouch for if Montecito Heights has the steepest hills that are paved anywhere in California. I've been on crazy hills in San Francisco. I've been in crazy hills in other parts of LA that I thought were like insane, and then I went there and I was like, I've never been on roads like this unless that were this steep and this narrow and this twisty, unless I was like off-roading in the mountains. Like
Yes.
it's insane.
Yes.
And the views are incredible because of that.
Yes.
It's a fun place to visit.
It's an adventure, and getting there is part of the experience for sure.
Well, Chiara, thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure to talk to you. These are some of my favorite things to talk about. So I appreciate you being the person that enabled me to have this conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Adam. This has been great. I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and it's an honor to be here and share some of my yoga story with your audience. And I look forward to more conversations.
Definitely. All right. Hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed that as much as I did, please consider giving us a positive review on iTunes or Google Podcasts. It really means a lot and helps spread the word. We're trying to get more of this podcast out to more people because we've had some incredible guests on here, like Chiara, and we just think more people should hear about the stuff that is being said here because it's important for the world. And if you want to support the podcast in any other way, please consider buying some of our wine. Centralis Wine is our winery. That's CENTRALAS wine.com, or at Centralis Wine on Instagram. You can follow us, check us out. We do a lot of cool little posts, and we ship to all states. And, as I like to say, our wine is actually very drinkable. So I think you'd enjoy it. All right. Thanks for listening.